I have purchased another of these $90 Melefon N5105 11th generation 4-core CPU mini computers, mini PCs. This is the X7 model. I made a video about it and I'll post that down in the description. But the main takeaway from that video was, what is this for? It has internal M2 connector, SATA only. It has 2.5 gigabit per second Ethernet to go along with, a fairly, minimal 4-core low-end CPU. So the question is, what is this for? When I took it apart before, I discovered that it had no connector for the 2.5 inch SATA drive, which would allow you to put like a larger drive in here. And it's very, very hard to find a very, very large SATA drive in the M.2 form factor. And actually, M.2 SATA drives are a little expensive. So you don't get a lot of value by upgrading the SATA M.2 drive in here. But it did have a header. It had a header for what I think it was the header. I'm going to try it out. Here's a ribbon cable to SATA connector, and we're going to try that and see if we can get a 4 gig SSD 2.5 inches in there, in which case this maybe becomes a nice PC to have on your network to maybe synchronize files or run backups to, or things like that. So let's get started. I've opened the second box, and interestingly, whereas the old box did not come with a SATA connector, look what this one comes with. This one came with a SATA connector. And in fact, I'm glad it did, because I would have got in there. I was just guessing naturally about what the connector was. So that'll go in the parts drawer. This connector is a little bit different. It looks like it will work. So we'll go ahead and try this with a 2.5 inch SSD and see how that works for us. Well, a bit of a mystery here. It does look like I had chosen from online for this a somewhat better pin. Let's see, we got 1, 2, 3. It's hard to see that. 1, 2. Okay, I stand a little bit corrected here. I was able to get it in there. It's right behind the USBs. There's a connector there. And so this is the SATA connector to the board. I'm not quite sure if anybody has any idea what this little 12-pin port down here is for. Let me know in the comments. I just haven't played with a lot of ribbon connectors on little mini PCs like this. So anyway, we are able to move forward and see if this works well with a SATA SSD. Okay, as soon as I booted off of a Linux installer thumb drive, hey, guess what? It can see the SSD. So it is working. I'm going to go ahead and do a bunch of other setup that I won't bore you with. We'll come back and look at how fast it is. Okay, I'm back. And what we're going to do now is just test that drive. I'm just doing it with the Ubuntu installer. In fact, if we do ls blk, we can see a bunch of different devices are here. There is SDA, which is the 256 gig SATA M.2 SSD that comes with this system. Here we have our bigger SDB came up as the 4 terabyte drive, SDC that you can see right here. That is the thumb drive that I'm using, the regular USB drive that we're booted off of right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a few tests. First, just to check the speed of that SSD, because I'm not going to install the 4 terabyte SSD in this Melefon device. So we'll just test its speed from here, for which we need to install a couple things. I think that's right. Yes. Because the installer doesn't come with GNOME disks. And then we will do sudo snap install. We're going to do kdiskmark. And kdiskmark is just the, a nice sort of Linux version that's very, very similar, and I think fairly apples to apples version of Crystal Diskmark. Okay, let us take a look at GNOME disks. And here we can see there's that 4 terabyte disk. It had some other Linux stuff installed on it that I was playing with. Let's just take this ext file system right here. Go ahead and go down to benchmark partition. We will start the benchmark. I usually change the number of samples up to maybe 1,000, which will be a little bit slower, but I'll speed that up. We'll also do the access time on this disk, and we'll see if it's what we expect. Okay, so that is quite a bit slower than we might like. The maximum for SATA is around 600 megabits per second. I would expect most SATA interfaces to be able to, pull at least on an average read rate of like 540 or so, and we're only at 402, so barely over 400 megabytes per second. Write rate a little bit slower, so obviously the performance of that cable and the extension or the addition to the board just isn't up to snuff on this mini PC. It's fine for most things. In fact, you'll notice it's still probably faster than the around 300 megabits per second that you should expect from a 2.5, at best a 2.5 gigabit per second connection. So it's still well matched for the networking on this device, at least. Let's do kdiskmark. I'll come right back with that because I have to mount a directory so that it can see it, etc. So I'll be right back. So all I did was I created a temporary directory, I mounted it, I changed its ownership a little bit. So we should be able to do kdiskmark now. And sure enough, we get kdiskmark. I'd like to do a side-by-side. Let's go ahead and do a partition on that 4 terabyte drive first. We'll speed through this so we can see the results. Here we go. Okay, so K disk mark did quite a bit better. These are acceptable numbers for sequential, um, you know, one thread Q depth 8. That's not bad. Everything else here is about more or less kind of what we would expect. These sequential numbers are surprisingly close to the random numbers for Q depth 32 with one thread, but okay, um, that's just how it is. I'll go back in a minute and I think I know how we can maybe speed up those results and verify that that we can get something out of GNOME disks that's on a par with what K disk mark is showing us here. I'm still going to try to trick Crystal. I'm still going to try to trick GNOME disks into giving us a happier result with sequential files. And I don't want quite as many access times this time. Well, it's very interesting. You can see we're catching up. So I think what KDiskMark is doing there is just a better job of queuing up a lot of sequential files than this tool is. Honestly, I'm a little surprised. Usually they're pretty close to one another. And, that might be, you know, a good argument for maybe why you don't want to put a SSD, an extra 2.5-inch SSD in this device. That probably is a reason not to. Not that it's a terrible thing to do. It will give you the space. It might be a nice place to synchronize files with as a part of a backup strategy or something like that. I don't know. I don't think it's what I'm going to use these Melefon devices for. I think I'm going to come back later and show you some work with some clusters. Try to try to see if I can take advantage on a cluster that 2.5 gigabit per second NIC. So that's what I've got for you right now. It's still an interesting little device. I think I have nice things to say about it at $90. It's not very upgradable. It was a terrible pain to take the lid outside, the plastic lid off of that is also the SSD holder off of the aluminum case. The screws were very, very difficult to remove. So it's not easy to install a 2.5-inch disk in this either. So let's just see what we can do with it as a compute node. More experiments to come with the Melefon. Thanks.